GariTalks. Haven't sent or recorded a video in quite some time. Something that's been on my heart a lot recently. Very much a lot recently. And it's funny that it keeps coming up. I met somebody new recently and told them that my mother's Taiwanese, my father's Haitian, and they're from Brazil. So it's really interesting meeting people outside of the US context who are able to kind of hold space for Blackness in a more complex way. Because for them, they're Black, but also to a lot of Black people, they would not be considered to be such. And they were the one of the first people recently really to be like, what is that like being Asian? And I was like, I'm glad you asked. Chinese New Year's tomorrow. Most of my Black friends don't check in with that, nor really care about that, nor even know that that's like a thing that exists for me. It's funny. This necklace that I wear is from an Asian person. It was their wedding gift. Their husband passed away, so they gave it to me. Much gratitude to them for that. But it's also there's characters on it, right? And and when I meet other Asian people who don't know that I'm Asian, there's this one woman who I pulled up in the store with her. It just pulled up to order food, and my mom came in afterwards, and she was like, I was wondering who this person was. Like, she has a necklace of ours and stuff like that. So there's this very it's a very interesting place to be as a person who is biracial. And I know so many experiences growing up where people would ask me how I identify. Oh, you're Black and Asian? Cool. Like, how do you identify? And I'd be like, Asian. At the time, because I wasn't really connected to my dad's side of the family like that. I lived with my mom. I spoke Mandarin. Like, I ate Asian cuisine. Like, I grew up in an Asian household. I would be like, Asian. And they'd be like, no, but you're Black, though. So, and I was like, That was the first time I really learned like how you self-determine is important, and also people are going to consistently react to you in a particular way. And more often than not, my Asian identity is treated as an accessory to who I am. Like, oh, you are Black, and then there's this Asian like flavoring on top. And something I've been thinking a lot about is this talk of intersectionality, right? Intersectionality is the idea that people are not just one thing. I'm not just Black. I'm not just a woman or a non-binary queer person, or middle class. Like, they all collect together to be a particular kind of experience. And I think it's interesting because we kind of take on the, intersectional lens. Like, how can we look at this from an academic intersectional lens versus like understanding that people live at different intersections. Like, my experience of race is very different than an African American person's, or a full Haitian American person, or a full Haitian person. These are all very different things. And what's interesting is like I don't know, it's hard to say, but like nobody's experience is more valid than the other. It is the experience that we have. And a lot of trouble that I actually find is, and this is hard to say, and that's why I haven't spoken on it a lot. It's just like, I have not found a lot of Black people who are able to hold space for my complexity as a mixed race person. I have to be with other mixed race people who kind of understand that, who have been forced to choose between their identities, and typically you got to choose the one that you look like. So even like white people who are mixed with other things, they have to choose the white, because if you can pass as white, people be like, you're white. And it's just so interesting because, like, yes, I'm Black, and that never really speaks to the fullness of my experience. The amount of times I've been teased by my Haitian family for being Asian, and the fact that I never really fit in to my Asian side of the family, for sure, right? And it's this constant living in the no-betweens, in the in-between, the betwixts. It's really interesting. It is definitely really interesting, and it's also taught me a lot about how I came into my Blackness and understanding my Blackness in America. It really came about in college. Well, in like high school, in 10th grade. Like, I've always known I was Black, right? Because I've always been treated as other or different. And people have always pointed out my brown skin to me. But I didn't know what being Black meant really until like, I guess, 5th grade, when I went to prep, and we started being it was an achievement program about getting people, minorities and marginalized groups, into white spaces. For high school and stuff. And so it was in that I was like, I remember being with a lot of Black and brown people, and then pulling up in school with all these very white people, very wealthy white people, and being like, oh, there's a difference here. Okay. There's a difference here. And I remember going to SDLC, Student Diversity Leadership Conference. That was the first time I learned about diversity aside from race. There's, religions, gender, sexual orientation. There's so many different forms of diversity. But it was the first time that I feel like I became more radicalized in my politics and understanding like Black people are treated a particular way in America. It is supported by a legacy, and it is supported by cycles of oppression, and like poverty is perpetuated as oppression. Like it is cycles that it's very hard to break out of, because there's so much there's so much systematic structure in place, and there's also so many social stigmas around it as well. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But I didn't really even have to delve into my Blackness until it was really time to apply for college, when you'd have to pick a box. At the time, there was no mixed race box. It was either Black, Asian, all the other ones, or other. And I would choose other because I'm not fully Asian, I'm not fully Black. And it's so interesting when I meet people who are like, as a biracial person, I am allotted so many privileges. And I'm like, yes, I can sit with the privilege of light skin privilege, right? I can sit with the privilege of pretty privilege. I can sit with being fully able-bodied and all of these things. And also, none of these things detract from the fact that I've never felt at home in any category, and that I need to find people who specifically share my experience to be able to find community. Because a lot of the time when I'm with a lot of Black people, they want me to forget about my Asian culture, right? Because they talk a lot of shit. Like, it's important to recognize when we're calling things out, and also when we talking shit about other races and stuff. Like, this whole thing about being a model minority for Asian people is like a myth, right? Because Asian people have suffered an incredible amount of violence in the space, and like the things that they do are also for survival. It's just very, I don't know, it's very interesting, and I think it's a lot more nuanced than people want to get into. I think people often want to just cling to like the validity of their experience and their identity, and like other people's identity can't exist in amidst their identity. And I think one thing that's been really cool about being betwixt and being in the spaces in between is that, I mean, we're a lot of things at one time. That's why I think people can be good and bad, right? I think we're all the things. I think we're whole. That's why I love the shadows, and I love all these things that don't really make a lot of sense, and they're not neat and packaged. But I don't know, I'm really not here for being called to choose one of my identities over the other one, or that my Blackness makes me valid in pain, but then my Asianness somehow invalidates my pain as a Black person and also as an Asian person. Like, it just feels very confusing. And I think it's so often I don't know, it's important to talk about harm, and it can be so hard to talk about harm when, I mean, the harm is interlocking, right? I've been hurt by Black people, I've been hurt by Asian people. And that doesn't make either experience less valid. So, I don't know. That's just one thing I've been thinking about.